In the chaos that followed the Battle of Poitiers, the lines between knights and band, its blurred, and the world of chivalry became a dark and dangerous place. Imagine a time when the very people sworn to protect the realm turned into its worst enemies, and the rule of law was nothing more than a distant memory. This is the story of a period in history when the world was upside down, and the brave and the bold did whatever it took to survive. In 1356, the Battle of Poitiers ended with a shocking defeat for the French. King Jean II of France was captured by the English, led by the Black Prince, and taken as a prisoner to London. This event marked the beginning of a dark chapter in French history, where the absence of the king led to a power vacuum and widespread anarchy. The once respected knights, who were supposed to uphold chivalry and protect the weak, began to act more like bandits. They roamed the countryside, pillaging and plundering, causing immense suffering to the common people. One of the most notorious of these knights was Eustache d'Aubressecourt, a young and daring knight from Hainault. After the Battle of Poitiers, Eustache turned to a life of banditry with such flair and success that he became a legend. He was not just a robber. He was a charismatic leader who amassed a large following of freebooters. His reputation grew so much that he caught the attention of the widowed Countess of Kent, a noblewoman and a niece of the Queen of England. The Countess, captivated by Eustache's bold and adventurous spirit, sent him horses, gifts, and passionate letters, encouraging him to continue his daring raids. Eustache's band of freebooters, numbering around 2,000, terrorized the regions of Champagne and Picardy. They seized castles and sold them back to their rightful owners for a hefty ransom, making Eustache and his men incredibly wealthy. Despite his criminal activities, Eustache's reputation among his own kind remained intact. In 1360, he even married the Countess of Kent, a union that was seen as a match made in heaven, despite the questionable nature of his past deeds. The chaos caused by Eustache and other bandits was not just a local issue. It had far-reaching consequences for France as a whole. King Edward III of England, aware of the turmoil in France, was more than willing to let the bands of freebooters continue their raids. He saw it as a way to keep pressure on France and gain leverage in the ongoing negotiations for peace. Even when the French complained to King Edward about the violations of the truce, he did little to stop the bands, as he saw them as valuable tools in his broader strategy. The impact of these raids on the common people was devastating. Villages and towns were left in ruins, and the peasants were forced to take extreme measures to protect themselves. They turned their stone churches into forts, surrounding them with trenches and manning the bell towers with sentinels. The sound of church bells, once a call to prayer, now signaled the approach of danger. Peasant families who could not reach the safety of the church spent their nights on islands in the Loire River, or in boats anchored in the middle of the river. In Picardy, they took refuge in underground tunnels that had been expanded from ancient caves, complete with wells and air holes for ventilation. The situation was so dire that even the clergy and monasteries were not safe. Monks and nuns abandoned their monasteries, and highways and roads became too dangerous to travel. The chronicler Jean de Venette, a Carmelite prior and head of the order in the 1360s, described the situation in his chronicle with great sorrow and anger. He blamed the Regent of France and the nobles for their failure to protect the people. According to Jean, the nobles had become selfish and corrupt, despising and hating all others, and taking no thought for the common good. They subjected and despoiled the peasants and villagers, trampling the land and robbing the people of their goods, while the regent did nothing to address their plight. The discord among the Estates General, the governing body of France, only worsened the situation. The estates, which represented the clergy, the nobility, and the common people, were unable to work together effectively. The lack of unity and cooperation led to the abandonment of important reforms, and the kingdom began to unravel. Jean de Venette wrote that the country and the land of France were plunged into confusion and mourning, for they had no defender or guardian. Even the Church, which was supposed to be a source of solace and guidance, was not immune to the corruption and decay. A Benedictine monk, writing a Latin polemic called Tragic Account of the Miserable State of the Realm of France, expressed deep shame and anger at the state of the nation. He questioned the military discipline and leadership of the knights, asking where they had learned the art of war. Was it in the pleasures of court and the pursuit of personal gain? He also criticized the common people, who were more concerned with their own comfort and the desires of their women, and the clergy, who were sunk in luxury, gluttony, and greed. The capture of King Jean II and his subsequent treatment in England further highlighted the depths to which France had fallen. King Jean's arrival in London as a prisoner of the Black Prince was a spectacle of medieval pageantry. He was dressed in black, like an archdeacon or a secular clerk, and rode a tall white horse alongside the prince on a smaller black palfrey. The procession through London was a grand affair, with houses hung with captured shields and tapestries, and cobblestones strewn with rose petals. The people of London were eager to see the once mighty King of France, and the event became one of the greatest celebrations in the city's history. Despite his captivity, King Jean was treated with great honor and allowed to enjoy the pleasures of court life. He lived in the Savoy, a new palace of the Duke of Lancaster, and was at liberty to receive visitors from France. His expenses, however, were a stark contrast to the suffering of his people. He spent lavishly on horses, dogs, falcons, a chess set, an organ, a harp, a clock, and elaborate wardrobes for his son Philip and his favorite jester. He even maintained an astrologer and a king of minstrels with an orchestra, and held a cockfight. King Jean's lifestyle in captivity was a testament to the disconnect between the nobility and the common people, a disconnect that would have tragic consequences for France. Negotiations for King Jean's ransom and the conditions of a permanent peace treaty were long and difficult. King Edward III demanded the cession of Guyenne, Calais, and all the former Plantagenet holdings in France, as well as an enormous ransom of 3 million écus for King Jean. In return, he would give up his claim to the French crown. The French commissioners, under pressure from papal delegates, struggled to find a solution that would satisfy both sides. The one thing they could not consider was leaving King Jean unransomed, for the monarchy was seen as a principle of order and stability in France. The people yearned for their king, even if he was a careless representative of the crown. The French provinces, believing that royal power was their last hope for protection against the bands of freebooters, did not want to see the monarchy weaken. In August 1357, the Dauphin, the heir to the throne, took a bold step and reinstated the dismissed councillors, defying the Council of 36, a group of reformers led by Etienne Marcel, the provost of Paris. Marcel, frustrated by the Dauphin's actions, sought an unlikely ally in Charles of Navarre, a rival claimant to the French throne who had recently escaped from prison. Charles of Navarre, with his eloquent and venomous speeches, quickly gained the support of the Parisians. He spoke of his claim to the crown, which he said was at least better than King Edward's, and rallied the people against the Dauphin. The Dauphin, recognizing the threat, was forced to re-enter Paris and recall the estates. He assembled a large force of men at arms in the Louvre and addressed the people, turning sentiment in his favor. Marcel, feeling the tide turn against him, resorted to violence. On January 11, 1358, Marcel led a group of 3,000 artisans and tradesmen to the royal palace. They murdered 2 of the Dauphin's marshals, Jean de Clermont and Jean de Conflans, in front of the Dauphin himself. The bodies were dragged to the courtyard of the palace, and Marcel addressed the crowd from a window of the city hall, asking for their support. The mob, already stirred by Marcel's rhetoric, shouted their approval and declared their loyalty to Marcel. The Dauphin, fearing for his life, was forced to accept the red and blue hoods of the popular party as a symbol of his alliance with the people. This act of violence against the monarchy and the nobility marked a turning point in the conflict. The murder of the marshals cost Marcel the remaining support he had among the nobles, who now saw their interests aligned with the crown. The Dauphin, though initially intimidated, hardened his resolve and took steps to regain control. He sent his family to the nearby fortress of Meaux for safety, and moved himself to Senlis outside the capital. In May 1358, the Dauphin's actions precipitated the Jacquerie, a violent uprising of the peasantry. The Dauphin had ordered the nobles to fortify and provision their castles, which some chroniclers claim led to the seizure of the peasants' goods, provoking the uprising. Others argue that the uprising was instigated by Marcel, who convinced the peasants that the Dauphin's order was a prelude to new oppressions and confiscations. Regardless of the cause, the Jacquerie was a desperate and ferocious response to the long-standing grievances of the peasants. The peasants, long the backbone of the medieval world, rose up in a wave of violence that struck terror into the hearts of the nobility. These were the people who labored in the fields, sowed the seeds, scythed the hay, trampled the grapes, sheared the sheep, and herded the swine. They were the ones who bore the brunt of the nobles' greed and the king's neglect. Now they had had enough. They burned down castles, killed their lords, and took control of their own destinies, however briefly. Ingaer and Decaussy, a young nobleman of 18, was swept into the Jacquerie and played a visible role in the uprising. Ingaer, and who had already received the homage of his vassals, was likely sympathetic to the peasants' cause, as many nobles were at the time. The Jacquerie, though short-lived, was a powerful symbol of the deep-seated anger and frustration that had been simmering among the common people for years. The Jacquerie was eventually crushed, and the peasants were forced back into submission. The nobles and the monarchy, though shaken, emerged from the conflict with a renewed sense of their power and authority. The events of the Jacquerie and the years that followed the Battle of Poitiers serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of medieval society and the devastating consequences of anarchy and corruption. In the end, the story of this period is a cautionary tale about the dangers of leadership that fails to protect the people it serves. It is a story of knights who became bandits, of a king who was more concerned with his own pleasures than the well-being of his subjects, and of a people who finally rose up in a desperate bid for their rights. It is a story that resonates even today, a reminder of the importance of justice, order, and the rule of law in any society.